Hello students, today we are going to discuss objectives of punishment. Myself Dr. Upma Gautam, I am Assistant Professor in Law Department in Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University. So today we are discussing this module with an outcome that in the end of it you would be able to explain that what is the importance of the sanctions in a given society. In addition to this, you would also be able to appreciate the difference between the formal and informal sanctions and their role in maintaining the social order. Secondly, you would be acquainted with the various punishments and the objectives underlying such punishments. You would be acquainted about the merits and demerits of each philosophy behind such infliction of punishment. And lastly, it would develop a critical thinking and amongst you about the form and extent of punishment which is ideally required in a contemporary times. So let us start. Since the very inception of the society, as far as the punishments are concerned, they are to be taken as the eventual reaction to the criminal and deviant behavior in every civilization and societies. Now, in societies, crime and punishments are integral part of them, though the concept crime and the punishments given thereto differ in different societies and also in different time periods. As far as the human civilization at different stages is concerned and at different point of time, different societies have always exhibited different reactions to crimes and criminals. It is not only that the humans respond to any harm committed to them or to their loved ones, but such a behavior can also be seen in animals. For example, if you step up at a dog's tail, and the most probable reaction would be that it will bite the person. Now the same is with the case with the person hitting the beehive. Therefore, the idea of punishing the wrongdoer is an innate rational both in animals as well as humans. But in humans, the idea of inflicting punishment cannot be an impulsive reaction to any harm done by the wrongdoer, unlike animals. The purpose and form of punishment to be inflicted is to be more rationalized process, unlike animals. In order to control the behavior that is in violation of the societal norms, all the societies and social groups build up the mechanism of which the sanction forms a very important part and institution as well. These sanctions can be categorized into formal and informal sanctions, which further can be subdivided into positive and negative sanctions. The categorization is based on their forms and sources. Sanctions as a tool for social control compel the individuals to abide by the social norms through the fear of reactions of the society, and through these external sources the social control is accomplished. Punishments are negative formal sanctions and are inflicted by the state or by some authorized formal organization. Now, as far as punishment is concerned, punishment as the important tool for maintaining the social control are devised to impose pain. The pain so inflicted varies from trivial inconveniences, that is fine, to imprisonments and major punishment such as to death sentences. The degree of the pain so inflicted varies with the purpose that the punishment is going to serve. A wide varieties of purposes are served through these punishments, which may include firstly resubstantiating the collective values, secondly shielding the society through the physically incapacitating of the wrongdoer, thirdly deterring not only the convicted individual from the repeating of the same offence, but also causing fear and punishment in the like-minded people. Now, in addition to this, there are some punishments such as compensation to the victims, which are formulated for a rationale which is restorative. The present module deals exhaustively with the various punishments and the underlying objectives of such punishments. Primarily, underlying philosophies such as deterrent, retribution, restoration, rehabilitation or incapacitation and forms of punishment decides its varying nature. During the Middle Ages, that is 1200 to 1600, the punishments were of retributive nature. Individual freedoms were dominated by superstitions and were eclipsed with divine rules. Therefore, the most brutal forms of punishments were inflicted. Now, these brutal punishments were not only socially accepted, but also supported by the religious sanctions. But with the progressive thinking and with the progression of the civilization, the human who were criminals were determined, and therefore the new purposes of punishment were advocated. It resulted in their infliction of much more humane, mild and rationalized punishment. There has been a radical change in the approach of the penologists towards the concept of the punishment as a whole. In recent times, the primary concern of the penologists is the objective with which the punishment is to be inflicted and the affirmation of such objectives in penal policy. The rationalization of punishment may be divided into two classes based on retributive and utilitarian theories, while the retributive theory emphasized that the infliction of punishment is justified in itself as natural reaction to the offense. The utilitarian theories regard punishment as an evil which should be used only if it serves some fruitful purpose like deterrence, prevention, reformation, restoration. Now, punishing with an objective of retribution. So, we will concentrate on that. Now, as far as this is concerned, the principles of revenge and retribution are amongst the oldest and most elementary justification for punishment. It emphasizes the notion of eye for an eye, which is embedded in the Judeo-Christian tradition in the Mosaic laws of the Old Testament. The punishment by virtue of this justification is neither restricted by the seriousness of the offense that the offender has done, his culpability, nor is given by an objective of preventing the offense from repeating the wrong in the future. This philosophy of retribution simply advocates the idea that the offenders should get what they deserve. The idea of retribution sustained as a popular idea throughout Western history and found its basis not only in the law but also in the public beliefs. Retributive theories of punishments have a long history. In the 19th century, let the punishment fit the crime was the classical retributive principle which formed the primary basis for infliction of the punishments in most of Western Europe. Modern criminologists put forward retributive as a justification, as a retribution as a justification for punishment as just deserts. The thinkers who advocate retributivism as a basis of punishment are of the view that the punishment is justifiable if it is merited or deserved, and it is deserved when it is a response to injustice or wrongdoing. Therefore, the key of retribution is moral proportionality, which means that the punishment should mirror the degree of the moral wrong the offender has perpetuated. Further, the retributive justification of punishment has been verified by various theories on spirituality, aesthetic and expiatory grounds. It is believed that the offender's goal is washed away since he undergoes the punishment, and thereafter the social harmony which is being unsettled by the offender is resettled. Now, according to the retributive philosophy of punishment, an unmerited harm in an unmerited way is being inflicted on a victim, and by such infliction the offender gains an advantage which he does not merit. Therefore, by such an act an imbalance is caused in the society which punishment sets straight by removing the undeserved benefits from the offender, by imposing a penalty in some form or the other. Now, since punishment aims at the restoring the social balance disturbed by the offender, and therefore it focuses on its objective, which is that the criminal should face the same destiny as he puts his victim into. The offender should receive as much pain and suffering as inflicted by him on his victim to avenge not only the sentiments of the victim but the community as a whole. Arguments in contemporary times for retribution often take a Kantian view, appealing to the notion that the commission of a crime encompasses consent to punishment, and such punishment is the only way to which the preservance of moral order can be done and defended. Responding to wrongful acts by retributive punishment focuses on the moral instance taken by the state in punishing the wrongdoer. Kant distinguished the judicial punishment from natural punishment. According to Kant, natural punishment does not come within the cognizance of the legislator because the crime as a wrong punishes itself, whereas juridical punishment is not to be inflicted as a means for promoting another good, but is to be imposed on the individual only because of the reason that he has committed a crime. Immanuel Kant asserts in his philosophy of law that punishment is not justified by any good results but simply by the criminal's guilt. The criminal does not pay for the wrongdoings in the form of punishment which befit the crime he has committed, causes injustice. The behavioral premise of just deserts is that individuals are predominantly decision makers and are therefore responsible for the acts. The political premise is that the individuals are entitled to equal respect and dignity. Further, an offender deserves punishments but does not forfeit all rights on conviction and has a right not to be punished disproportionately for the crime committed, and such punishment is the payment of what is owed, that is, the individual who is punished is paying his debt to society. However, it is being cautioned and explained that the retribution and the related payment is not to be confused with the payment to the society, but it is the payment to the victim, and the wrongdoer pays back to the society for its breach of the peace by the commission of such offence. According to Hegel, crime not only is annulled by punishment, but also the rights of the victim are asserted by such punishment. Punishment is also deemed to be a necessary expression of the justified anger of the community. It is further argued by the criminologist in favor of the retributive justification of the punishment that punishment ought not only to communicate justified censure, but also thereby to persuade offenders to repent, self-reform and reconcile. Now, let us come to the benefits of retributive justification for punishment and also about the concern and issues. Now, the primary philosophical and practical concerns with the retributivism is the linkage with vengeance, which can be explained in simple terms to be just a retaliation for the harm done. Justifying punishment on the basis of retribution raises some primary concerns, which are: firstly, the punishment on this basis is deemed to be a response or a reaction to a past event, which makes it a backward looking. phenomena. Secondly, under the justification, the punishment is linked to moral wrongdoing, and therefore the infliction of punishment is just a consequence for the injustice caused by the offender. And thirdly, punishment on the basis of retribution stresses upon the notion of merit and desert. Further, the principle of just desert in itself is not clear. The very first place, because of the very fact that it does not define as to what should decide seriousness of the offence and the proportionality of the punishment. The theory of just desert was a reaction against the perceived unfairness systems that favoured offenders extensively in the name of treating such offenders and concept of indeterminate sentence in which the offenders were often released on parole. This theory though demanded the reduction of the discretion in the sentencing, but the whole idea of the determinative sentencing resulted in the arbitrary exercise of power of release. Now, due to the individualist opinion of the judges or due to the political responses to people's opinion fueled by media, pressure in order to give effect to get tough on crime policies, the offenders were given harsher punishments. Whereas, just desert theory itself does not call for harsher punishments. Therefore, without any fundamental principle of guidelines determining a justified sentence, the critics fear the arbitrary use of the desert theory. It is further pointed out by the critics that retributivism based on just deserts fail to account for the problems of just deserts in an unjust world, such as poverty, disadvantage and discrimination, and presumes equal opportunities for all. Retribution justification of punishment further loses its ground on an argument of the critics that if an individual has the moral rights to exact retribution, then even a group of individuals in the society cannot morally claim such a right. As far as expiation facet is concerned, firstly, it is being argued by Blackiston that expiation should be left to the supreme being, and secondly, though it is being argued that after expiation the offender gets an opportunity of starting afresh, it is infeasible and practically because and impracticable, because once a person is being convicted, his chance of being admitted back to the society as a normal human being becomes very bleak. Now, let us come to the utilitarian objective of the punishment. During the 18th century, social philosophers such as Jeremy Bentham began to embrace the view that the human behavior was of result of rational thought processes. According to Bentham's utilitarianism, people choose to act when, after weighing the cost and benefits, they believe that their actions will bring them an increase in pleasure and a reduction of pain. It stands to reason that the criminal behavior could be eliminated or controlled if offenders or would-be offenders could be convinced that the pain of punishment exceeds the benefit of the crime. The utilitarian rationalized punishment with the help of criminal law as a means to achieve certain goals. Punishment as per this approach must serve as the instrument for reducing crime, either by deterring the offender and other like-minded people from doing similar acts in the future, or it should prevent the commission of the offences by incapacitating the offenders. Further, utilitarians advocate the idea that the reformation of the offenders through the punishment as an objective to be served by the punishment. Now, according to utilitarian perspective, the criminal acts for which punishment is to be authorized must be those with respect to which the good consequences of punishment can outweigh the bad. Therefore, the persons who should be punished must be those whom it is beneficial to punish, and the quantum of the punishment should not be decided by just deserts, but its utility. Thus, according to the approach, a punishment is deemed to be a result if it adds benefit and adds benefits, and the added benefits outweighs its harms and costs. The utilitarians do not believe the proportionality of the sentence, but support individualization of treatment of offenders. Therefore, severe and deterrent punishments are advocated for antisocials who are a threat to the society and who cannot be reformed, whereas rehabilitation and commutation of sentences should be accepted practices for positively transformed violators of social and legal norms. Now, coming to the deterrence and incapacitation as the outcome of the punishment, I would like to say that the criminal justice systems dispenses justice by apprehending, prosecuting and punishing lawbreakers. These activities also prevent crime by two mechanisms, that is deterrence and incapacitation. Would-be lawbreakers may be deterred from committing crimes by the knowledge that their crime may result in arrest, prosecution and harsher punishments. The criminal justice system may also avert crime by a non-behavioral mechanism, that is the incapacitation of convicted offenders who are incarcerated in jail or prison. During incarceration, they are physically restrained from committing crimes against the society at large. Coming to Cesare Beccaria, he applied the utilitarian principles to criminal behaviors in the famous treatise on crimes and punishment. According to him, people want to achieve pleasure and avoid pains. The writings of Beccaria and his followers and other social philosophers like Bentham, Gladwin Williams form the core of classical criminology, who treats crime as an act committed in the past, but advocates to use it as an opportunity for punishing the wrongdoers in such a way that it deters the like-minded people who are going to commit the offense in future. Basically, the objectives of punishment according to this approach is to send a message of the consequences emphatically, thereby causing deterrence amongst the members of the society. Further, according to the deterrence approach of punishments, firstly, in every society, people have a free will to choose criminal and the lawful activities to meet their needs or settle their problems. Secondly, criminal solutions may be more attractive because they usually require less work for a greater payoff. Thirdly, the person's choice of crime may be controlled by his or her fear of punishment. And fourthly, to be an effective crime deterrent, punishment must be severe, certain and swift. Therefore, creating fear is considered to be a prime objective of the punishment so inflicted. It is being argued that with an increased number of apprehensions and incarcerations, the credibility of the sanctions and the criminal justice systems will enhance. Now, as far as the issues and concerns with the deterrence, firstly, I would like to say that the incarceration with an objective of causing deterrence among society members provides temporary relief, because it is being argued by the critics that the motive for committing a crime can't be distracted by a fear of punishment, and therefore, if a person has a motive which seems to be correct to him for the commission of the crime, then he would commit the crime irrespective of the harsh punishments which are provided for such act. Further, it is being argued that the harsher punishment with an objective of causing deterrence have an ironical impact, because in reality it hardens up the criminal. He becomes accustomed with the punishment, and thereafter deterrence loses its impact and on such criminals. Therefore, it is often suggested that in such cases rehabilitation and prison reforms are better options. The most prominent concern which this theory raises is, despite the fact that the severe punishments are being inflicted for an offence, the rate of commission of such crime doesn't decreases. It is suggested that the deterrent approach is a veiled form of retributive theory, and there can be no certain answer which can be given as to the fact that whether punishments really deters the offenders or other members of the community. Further, it is argued that the effective enforcement is the key for bringing down the rate of crime, and the people differ from committing such acts by the quick action. Now, mere presence of penal provisions and providing of harsher punishments therein is of no deterrence. Now, coming to the prevention as an outcome for punishment, that is preventive theory of punishment, the approach of the prevention to be an objective underlying the infliction of punishment is also known as theory of disablement. The theory aims at notion that the crime can be prevented if the offender is disabled. This philosophy of prevention of crime focuses on the prevention of the repetitive crimes committed by the wrongdoer. Therefore, the supporters of the philosophy advocates the punishments like death sentence, life imprisonments, or confining the person in prison, maiming, externment, banishment, etc. Now, according to this theory, such punishment should be inflicted on the offenders which disables them from repeating the offence in future, thereby preventing the society from such offenders. It is being suggested that this philosophy of prevention works on the premise, firstly, such punishments discourages the future criminals for the simple reason that a fear is being created in their minds about the consequences of such an act, and secondly, it disables the offender from repeating the offence. Now, coming to the reformation aspect of the punishment, that is reformative theory. Now, reformation of the criminal is the recent philosophy which finds place in the regime of incarceration. Individualization and individualized treatment became the cardinal principle for the reformation of offenders. Unlike other philosophies of punishment, this theory seeks to bring about a change in the attitude of offender so as to rehabilitate him as a law-abiding member of the society. Reformative theory of punishment condemns all kinds of corporal punishments. The major focus of the punishment, according to this objective, is to rehabilitate the inmates in penal correctional institution so they are transformed into good citizens. According to reformist thinkers, punishment can only be justified if it looks into the future and not the past. Therefore, the purpose of the punishment should not be isolation or elimination of the criminals, but should be the mainstreaming of the offenders. The punishment should focus on changing their mental outlook through effective measures of reformation during the term of their sentence. Now, what are the criticism, coming to the criticism of the reformative theory? Reformative philosophy behind punishments is being criticized on the ground that individualized treatment model is more punitive, unjust and inhumane than other ideologies. It is being argued that prisons are nothing but the symbols of the intolerance of the society towards deviants. It is basically the denial of the society and social institutions to deal with the root cause of crime, such as poverty, discrimination, unemployment, and so on. Reformative theory is again and again criticized on the ground that there is no punishment involved in it, because there is no pain, and because the wrongdoer doesn't undergoes any pain, it can't be termed as punishment in its true sense. But this criticism is countered by the supporters of reformation on account that though the primary focus of punishment is reformation, but such reformation is during his detention. Further, loss of liberty during such conviction itself involved pain. Therefore, saying that there is no pain involved even in this reformative measures are adopted while an offender is undergoing such imprisonment, and it is a fallacy. Punishment with restorative. Now, this is the latest one with the philosophy that is underlying within the punishment. Now, another utilitarian sentencing objective is to repair the damage that the offence has caused by requiring the offender to make restitution or perform compensatory service for the victim or the community. Restorative justice approach that began to receive much emphasis towards the end of the 20th century is also sometimes defined to include acknowledgement of responsibility or repentance by the offender, coupled with forgiveness by the victim. Now, basic principles of the restorative justice are: the restorative process begins by redefining crime in terms of conflict amongst the offender with the victim and the affected institutions such as family, school, work, place, etc. Therefore, it is vitally important that the resolution take place within the context in which the conflict originally occurred, rather than be transferred to a specialized institution that has no social connection to the community or group from which the conflict originated. In other words, most conflicts are better settled in the community rather than the courts. By maintaining jurisdiction over the conflict, the community is able to express its shared outrage about the offence. Shared community outrage is directly communicated to the offender. The victim is also given a chance to voice his or her story, and the offender can directly communicate his or her need for social reintegration and treatment. Compensation to victims form an important ingredient of the restorative philosophy of punishment. This idea is borrowed from concept called restitution of victims to her original position as she was before the crime. According to a UN declaration, the offender should compensate the victim. However, if the offender is not in good financial position to compensate the victim, the state should endeavor to provide financial compensation to victim who have undergone the pain of offence, that is bodily injury or impairment of physical or mental health as a result of serious offence, and in other cases the family, in particular dependents of persons who have died or become physically or mentally incapacitated as a result of such victimization. It further provides for the establishment, strengthening and expansion of the national funds for compensation to victim. Therefore, the case for restitution to victims of crime rests primarily on two obligations. Firstly, an obligation of the criminal who inflicts the harm against person or property, and secondly, an obligations of the state who fail to protect the victim. Now, coming to the issues and challenges with the restorative justice, I would like to say that while restorative justice holds great promise, there are also some concerns. John Braithwaite warns that even though restorative justice recognizes that individual differences must be taken into account when justice is dispensed, but fairness should not be sacrificed for the sake of restoration. The philosophy of restoration must be cautious about the cultural and social differences that can be found throughout heterogeneous society. What may be considered as restoration in one subculture might be insulting and damaging in the other. Possibly, what is the greatest concern for the restorative justice is the difficult task of balancing the needs of the offenders with those of their victims. If the punishment is focusing solely on reconciling victims' needs, then there is a risk of ignoring the needs of the offender, which in result may increase the likelihood of repeating the offense by the offender. Now, another issue and concern in the restoration is that the victim's rights are threatened by some features of the restorative justice process, such as respectful listening to the offender story and consensual disposition. These features seem to be affronts to a victim's claim of the right to be seen as a victim, to insist on the offender being branded as a criminal, to blame the offender and not to be victimized all over again by the process. Now, concluding the module, I would like to say that in a coherent system of penal laws, a close relationship will always exist between the accepted theories of punishment and both the boundaries of substantive criminal law and procedural law by which criminal guilt is determined. The justification for punishment will for sure touch on the sentencing policies and the parameters concerning crime conception, but they are much more omnipresent. The justification and objectives of the punishment to be achieved, may it be retributive or utilitarian, are neither able to answer the needs of the society nor the objections raised against them in totality. Though over a period of time the basic tenets of both the approaches have been modified, but still utilitarian can be termed as unjust for the reason that it moderates the individual's interest by making infliction of severe punishment not only possible but also justifiable. Similarly, the retributive approach can be safely termed as revengeful rather than proportionate. It minimizes the role of mercy, as in practical implication it answers to the feeling of the society being avenged. Therefore, a balance has to be created amongst these two major approaches, that is utilitarian and retributive, and a hybrid justification for punishment is to be adopted. But it can also be concluded that the major features of the substantive and procedural laws are in consonance with each of the two major theories of punishment, which can't be ignored. Theories of punishments justification are often constructed with subsisting practices in mind and do not usually drift too afar from the reflective moral views of the citizens of the society. Thank you.